$625 is where this story starts. Not with $1 million, not with a yacht. That is the number. Not a corner office or some guy on a beach holding a laptop at a strange angle. $625 a month. Roughly what you spend on a car payment. Roughly what disappears on a few weekends.
Roughly the cost of deciding at 22 that your future self is worth one automatic transfer.
You either just felt that number land, or you felt nothing at all. And both of those reactions mean something. This is the story of two versions of you, with the same salary, the same apartment, the same student loan. The only difference between them is one decision made once in January at age 22. One of them made it, and one of them meant to. So watch what happens.
You are 22 years old, and your first real paycheck hits on a Friday.
$52,000 a year sounds like a lot. Until it doesn't. Until it breaks down into a bi-weekly deposit. That deposit arrives and disappears before you have figured out what to do with it. You look at the number on your phone and feel something between relief and confusion. You were supposed to feel like an adult, but instead you feel like you are running the same calculation your parents ran. Just with a different set of numbers and the same vague sense that you are probably doing it wrong. Your apartment costs $1,150 a month, and your student loan payment is $310. You have a phone bill, a grocery habit that expanded the moment you had your own kitchen, and a subscriptions folder you stopped opening. You still feel like you have money left over, but you just cannot locate it at the end of the month. Here is the moment where the two versions of you split into completely different lives. Version A opens a Roth IRA in January, not because they fully understand it, but because a friend mentioned it. It takes 20 minutes. They set up an automatic transfer of $625 a month, and they close the app. They connect it to a low-cost index fund that tracks the S&P 500, and they do not think about it again. Version B means to open one, they have the tab saved, and they will do it after the move. After the holidays, after they figure out the 401k, after things calm down. But things do not calm down. In December of that year, Version A has roughly $7,500 sitting in an account they barely think about. That account is slowly buying fractional shares of 500 of the largest companies in the United States, growing without requiring anything from them. Version B has a tab they closed in March, and that is not a judgment. That is just what happened. The silence comes here, before any of the numbers get dramatic, on a Sunday night in late December. Version B is lying on the couch. The apartment is quiet, and the week is already pressing down before it has even started. There's an ad on their phone for a retirement account, and they swipe past it without stopping. Not because they do not care, but because Monday morning is already sitting in their chest, and there is no room for one more thing. The tab can wait, and the tab has always waited. And maybe after the new year, things will be different. The new year comes, and the tab does not reopen. And that is the whole quiet catastrophe of it. The Roth IRA does not care what you intended. It only cares what you did. By 25, Version A has somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 sitting in their account. They have watched it go up and go down and go back up, and they watched it drop during one bad week. They felt a flicker of panic, and then forgot about it, because the transfer kept happening regardless of how they felt. The market does what markets do, the account keeps filling, and Version B at 25 is thinking about opening one. Seriously this time? They read an article, they feel the vague guilt that comes from knowing you should have started something. They put it on a list, and the list is on their phone, and the phone is in their pocket. There is a man named Raymond. He's 61 years old, and he worked for the same company for 34 years. He retired last year, and at family dinners, he brings up the subject of starting early more reliably than anything else. His nephew changes the subject. His niece smiles, the way you smile when someone tells you something you already know. Raymond keeps talking because he has nothing left to do about it for himself, and what he is really doing is time traveling. Trying to go back to a conversation no one wanted to have with him at 24, and nobody listens to Raymond. By the time version A turns 30, something is shifted, but not dramatically, not in a way that shows up at the birthday dinner. The shift is quieter than that. It is the specific feeling of opening an app and seeing a number you did not earn this month. A number that grew while you slept, while you worked, while you sat in traffic for 40 minutes thinking about something entirely unrelated. The balance at 30 is somewhere around $95,000 in this model, assuming the historical average annual return over long periods of time. That historical average has been roughly 10%, though in any given year it could be down 15 or up 24%. The only thing that mattered through all of it was that the transfer kept going. And 95,000 is not a promise. It is what the math looks like when a decision made at 22 has 8 years to work without interference. Version B, at 30, finally opens the account, and they are serious about it now, after a conversation with a coworker named Chris. Chris is 23 years old, works in finance, and opened a Roth IRA the same week as his first paycheck. He mentioned it once, casually, the way you mention you took a different route to work, and everyone assumed he was showing off. He was not showing off. He was just someone who had been told once, clearly, what compound growth does to money left alone. Chris is not remarkable, and that is the point. He is not a genius, and he is not disciplined in any extraordinary way. He still spends money on things he does not need. He just made one decision on a Tuesday and set up a recurring transfer. You meet someone like Chris at every age, and they always seem slightly ahead in a way that feels vaguely unfair. It is neither unfair nor arbitrary, because the gap between Chris and the person standing next to him is not talent. It is time. And time is the one thing it never gives back, no matter how clearly you eventually understand what you should have done. Version B opens their account at 30 with a $1,200 initial deposit, and they contribute when they remember. Some months they hit the full amount, some months they hit half, and some months the car needs something and the transfer does not happen. This is not a failure, because most people do this, and most people's Roth IRA looks exactly like this in their 30s. The question is not whether version B is a bad person. The question is what 8 years of compound growth costs when you do not use them. Compound interest does not reward intelligence. It rewards patience. And those are not the same thing. By 35, the gap between the two versions of the same person is roughly $140,000 in account value. They are the same person. They have the same degree, they work in the same industry, and they make roughly the same salary. One of them made one decision at 22 and never changed it. And one of them thought about it and put it on a list. $140,000 just from the first 13 years, just from $625 moving automatically before anyone could spend it. At 35, version A gets a raise, going from $58,000 to $67,000, and they increase their contributions slightly. Version B also gets a raise, and version B uses it to finally pay down a credit card that has been quietly humming in the background. Then they book a trip because they deserve it, and they absolutely do, and this is not a condemnation of that trip.
But the gap does not pause while the trip happens, and that is the thing nobody tells you clearly enough.
The money you put in at 22 does not just grow. It grows without asking for anything from you ever again. Deja is 35 years old. She works in healthcare administration, and she opened a Roth IRA during the pandemic after watching a video. She never contributed to it again, and the app is still on her phone, sitting there the way a gym membership sits there.
She knows it is there the way you know about something you meant to use and quietly stopped meaning to.
She is not the villain of this story. She is most people. She is statistically the majority of Roth IRA holders. Research from major investment institutions tracking tens of millions of retirement accounts shows most people who own a Roth IRA do not max it out. The gap between having the account and feeding it is the gap between reading about swimming and actually getting in the water. You are 45 years old, and you are standing in your kitchen, and the drawer still does not close right. It has not closed right for 3 years, and at some point it became something you just worked around without noticing. The apartment is quiet. It is a Tuesday, and nothing remarkable is happening in any direction you can see. Version A opens their phone, not to check the market, just because the phone is there and the habit is old. The balance on the screen is somewhere in the neighborhood of $390,000, modeled at a 7% average annual return. That is across 23 years of consistent contributions, and it is a conservative estimate, deliberately below the historical average. It is labeled that way because it is a model and not a forecast, and because the point is not the exact number. The point is what the number feels like to carry around on a Tuesday in your own kitchen with a drawer that still does not close. It does not feel like wealth. Not exactly. It feels like something more structural, like the floor is slightly higher than it used to be. It feels like the worst month at work is survivable in a way it would not be if that account were empty. It feels like less fear in the background, specifically the low-frequency fear that runs under everything when you are building from nothing. The drawer still does not close right, but the number on the phone is growing in the dark. It has been growing for 23 years and will keep growing, whether or not the drawer ever gets fixed. This is the silence, not the account balance, but the stillness around it, the specific quality of a Tuesday when nothing is required of you. When you have been doing one quiet thing consistently for long enough that the thing has become something separate from you entirely, something that exists outside your mood and your month and whether the car needs something again this week. Version B, at 45, has an account. It is real. It has money in it. And it is not nothing. But it is smaller than it would have been. And that distance between what is and what would have been never shows up on any screen. It lives in the negative space, in the thing that did not compound, in the years between the saved tab and the opened account. There is no villain in this story. There is only time. And the peculiar democracy of time is that it passes for everyone at the same rate. It asks only whether you gave it something to work with, and the answer to that question is either yes or it is not yet. The best time to open a Roth IRA was your first paycheck, and the second best time still requires a first paycheck. In 2026, the annual contribution limit for a Roth IRA is $7,500 for anyone under 50. That is a confirmed number from the IRS, not a projection, and it went up from $7,000 the year before. If your income as a single filer is above $153,000, it starts to phase out gradually. Above $168,000, you cannot contribute directly at all, But for most people watching this at 25, that ceiling is not the problem. The problem is the floor. The problem is the first transfer. The problem is the tab that stays saved and never opens. $625 a month, every month, beginning at 22, that is the cost of a life that is different at 65. Not glamorous, not certain, just different in the specific way that matters, which is that every dollar in that account comes out tax-free. No income tax on the growth, no required minimum distributions forcing you to take money out on someone else's schedule. The tax break is not a gift that arrives at 22. It is a gift that arrives at 65 on a Tuesday in a kitchen. In a life you will have mostly forgotten building, because the building happened automatically, quietly, one transfer at a time. The tax break does not show up the day you contribute. It shows up on the day you are 65 and owe nothing. At 65, the model puts version A somewhere between $1.4 and $1.8 million in their Roth IRA. That depends on what the market actually did, how often they increased contributions as their income grew, and variables no model can fully account for. That range is illustrative and not a promise. It is what the math suggests when you give a consistent contribution 43 years of runway. Version B at 65 has saved, has a real account, is not destitute, and is not a cautionary tale designed to shame anyone. But version B is working at 64, not because they were careless or foolish or meaningfully different from the person standing next to them. Because $625 a month for 43 years is not a small decision. It is a quiet and enormous one. It is the kind of decision that does not feel like a decision when you make it. It only feels like one very late. Only when you can finally see the other version of your life from here, standing in a kitchen on a Tuesday at 65, you are back at 22. The paycheck just hit, and the number on your phone is new and slightly unreal. The apartment is yours in the way things are yours when you are still figuring out what yours even means. There is a tab open somewhere about retirement accounts, and there is a list somewhere with it written down. $625 a month, and the only question that matters right now is a simple one. This month, what did that number do?